Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Guy Windsor. Hi Guy.
Hello.
Oh, it's super to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. So just a little introduction. Guy is a swordsman, an author and entrepreneur. He researches and teaches medieval and Renaissance Italian swordsmanship and runs the School of European Swordsmanship. And this is just way too awesome. And we are going to talk about martial arts and about writing as a discipline. And also we might have a guest appearance of a sword on the show. So it's all super exciting, Guy. You can tell I'm hyperventilating.
Swords tend to have that effect on people.
No wonder you do
Swords
it.
are cool. Yeah.
Swords are cool. So tell us, just start by telling us a bit more about how you became a swordsman and also how you got into writing.
Okay. I've been into martial arts since I was little. I don't really remember a time when I didn't. When I wasn't interested in martial arts. I think it began because I had a big brother who wasn't very nice to me, and then I was reading Asterix. I think it was the 12 Tasks of Asterix, and there's this bit where he has to fight this little judo guy, and Obelix goes in going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to just," and Obelix gets kind of pasted on the floor, like this judo guy is beating a rug.
Yeah.
And so Asterix, really clever, he kind of goes, "That's amazing, can you show me how to do it?" And sure enough, this judo guy, being an instructor and what have you, he shows Asterix how to do it. Yes, pull this arm and do that. And then suddenly this judo guy is completely immobilized, and so Asterix has won. And it's the idea of somebody being, you can be smaller and weaker, but if you're better trained or cleverer, you can still win. That's the thing that I really like. And to me, weapons are they're just so much more efficient. It's basically, a sword is a labor-saving device. So, if you want somebody to die, punching them in the head many times takes time and is, effortful. Whereas you can just kind of poke them with a sword and then fall down and,
although we do have to point out that you don't actually kill people
No,
with
I don't
swords
actually.
in real life.
Yeah, a little boy my wife used to look after, when he heard what I did for a living at the age of 5, he looked at my wife and said, he doesn't kill people, does he? I was like, no, not usually.
No, but it's one of those very sort of long-term evolutionary skills that I worry about us losing these things. I really do. I'm like, yeah, I'm brilliant on a computer, but come the zombie apocalypse.
Oh, I'll be fine.
You'll be sorted. I'll be around your house, but you're in
Fine.
Finland, right? You're in
Yes.
Helsinki, which is
Yes.
awesome. I've been to Helsinki in the summer, and it's super town, really fun.
I like it. I've been here 15 years now. It's a great
Wow.
place.
Wow. But just coming back into the sword stuff. So you
Yeah,
started off doing martial arts, presumably, then you started learning about swordsmanship and now you run all these things, right? And you write about swords. So just tell us about
sure.
that journey.
Okay, well, basically what happened was, I did karate and stuff because that was what was available when I was about 11. And then when I got to my middle school, they had a fencing club. So I thought, fantastic, finally I get to real swords. And I was doing effectively sport fencing till I got to university. And at university, there was like so many martial arts. So I was like, my week went like this. Mondays was fencing, Tuesdays Tai Chi, Wednesdays was fencing, Thursdays Tai Chi, Fridays was Japanese weapons stuff called Kabudo. Saturday was karate. Sunday, there was usually some extra class or something going on. So I was basically training martial arts 7 days a week. It's kind of, I didn't really pay much attention to my degree at the time. It was like, yay, all these martial arts, I can do those. So, but the thing is, sport fencing is very artificial and it's very stylized, and it doesn't really follow the logic of a real sword fight. So all sorts of things get you points in competition that are suicide in a sword fight. And there were a bunch of other people who were similarly frustrated with the artificiality of sport fencing, and we sort of naturally kind of got together and started fighting each other with what we thought were realistic rules.
Mm.
And that led us to find books. I actually found my grandfather used to fence, and back in the beginning of the 20th century, he was born in 1895, and he actually had a book called The Sword and the Centuries, which was published in 1896, which has all these details of swords and books about swords from like the 16th, 17th centuries. So hang on, there are like old books by people who actually fought with swords for real. And so we went and found them in libraries, and just the word sort of generally got out that we were looking for these things. And in the oddest places, like a fight director in Glasgow heard about it, and he had just a few like early 18th century fencing books in his house.
Just for fun.
Right. Yeah, so we photocopied these, and we were studying them and reading from them and what have you. And we started a club called the Dawn Duelist Society.
Thus, your hobby has become your job successfully.
Yeah, for the second time. The first time it didn't work out so well. The second time it went much better.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. And at the same time, I had, obviously students in Edinburgh, because having founded the club, I was sort of one of the main instructors in the club. And the reason we founded the club was so we could fight people. And the reason we had to teach them is so that they would know what to do when we were trying to hit them. Because there's no fun fighting people who can't fight back.
No. Was this like reenactments and stuff? Did you like...
No, this was recreation of historical swordsmanship was the goal from the beginning. We did sometimes show up to reenactments just to kind of try and meet other people and fight other people. But the goals are very different. In a reenactment, you're putting on a show for the general public, and it has to be very safe. So you're not allowed to, for example, thrust to the face. Right. Most historical swordsmanship technique revolves around thrusting people in the face.
Yeah.
Right. It's there's a fundamental kind of disconnect between reenactment and the medieval martial arts or Renaissance martial arts as they're written down.
So let's move on into the writing, and for people listening, we are going to come back to sword fighting, but I thought for some people who weren't so interested in that, we should probably talk about writing.
Are there people out there who are not interested in swords?
Apparently there are. In fact, they might have turned off by now. But if you're still listening, so one of the in your book, I mean, you have a number of books, but in one of your books, you have a whole section on lessons from the art, which is also, writing and martial arts do have a lot in common. And I've had other fighters on the show. I've had an MMA guy. I've had Alan Baxter, who does a form of karate, and they talk about this too. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about what are some of the lessons from the art.
Probably the primary one is dealing with fear, because the practice of a martial art is fundamentally gaining the ability to behave as you would wish to behave whilst you are being threatened. Okay, that's basically what it does. People can fight naturally, some people better than others. But if you have a martial art, you have a specific way that you have worked out in advance as being a better way of fighting than just your natural kind of flailing around. So what tends to happen though is you train the martial art in a nice gentle way, and then you get into a fight and it all goes out the window and you go back to natural actions. So basically, martial arts training, once you're past the simple, this is a sword, swing it like that, is about being able to do it correctly under pressure and dealing with the things that you're frightened of. And there are all sorts of exercises and disciplines that we have that address this, because basically dealing with fear is a skill like any other skill. So, for instance, I am terrified of hanging upside down. Terrified. I just know if I get my hands onto a bar and get my knees over the bar, if I let go of my hands, my legs will go straight and I'll fall on my head.
No bungee jumping for you.
Well, actually, you'd think that, but so the thing is, it's frightening, but it's irrationally frightening. It's not actually terribly dangerous because, actually my legs are stronger than my hands. So most days I do it. Okay. And the moment when I let go, I am almost certain that I'm going to break my neck. I just know in my head that it's not going to happen, so I do it, but my entire body is perfectly certain that I'm about to die.
And equate that to writing a book.
Okay. Well, okay. Writing a book is a skill. It can be learned like any other skill. The reason that people who want to write books don't write books boils down to either lack of skills, or if they have the skills, they're frightened to apply them. Okay, and the main pressure of writing a book, I imagine, is you get this idea of, oh God, I'm going to write a book. It's going to be terrible. Everyone's going to hate me. Everyone's, and I'm going to be,
It's fear of failure.
Yeah, it's fear of failure or fear of ostracism or even fear of success. Because right now I'm in my little garret making no money, and I know what that life is like, and I can survive it. I don't know what it would be like if suddenly I was bringing in, I don't know, 5 figures a month. Not that that usually happens, but because it's a change, it's naturally frightening. Mm. So fear of success is probably less common than fear of failure, but it's equally real. Mm. So there are lots of ways of kind of getting around this. One way is you practice dealing with fear in a different context. So, for example, my hanging upside down thing. I don't recommend hanging upside down as a way to write books. But it's useful to do things that you don't want to do or that you're frightened of on a regular basis, because being able to do that is a very useful life skill. And which can be applied to anything, like, for example, writing books. So let's say you're writing a book, or you want to write a book, or you've even written one, but you're frightened to publish it. I don't think people are usually frightened of actually the writing, because you can do that kind of on your own in secret. But when they've got it, I know at least 3 people who have finished novels in their drawers they won't show to anybody. So one possibility is you don't publish it. Okay. Instead, you think, let's say you've written a thriller. You think of a friend of yours who reads thrillers, and you don't publish it. You just give it to your friend.
That's probably the scariest thing, because they're the ones who are going to judge you more than the rest of the world.
Or then another approach is you post it online anonymously and see what people think of it. Right? I mean, think of all the slash fic out there. Right? It's all posted anonymously, and most people don't turn into E.L. James at the end of it, but it's publishing anonymously allows you to publish things which you're frightened of. And then when you get the feedback, you can go, well, actually, that's not so bad. And if people liked it, you go, great. And if people didn't like it, you can go, well, I can fix that. And then you fiddle about, and then you maybe do it again until you're used to publishing something, not a book. That's scary. Not something which is like, this is a work of art I have made, and it is what I think of as a good book should be, and judge me from this. It's not your masterwork that you're handing out for judgment, right? It is just this little thing you've written, maybe a blog post or something, or a post on Facebook. I mean, people are publishing all the time. People who are afraid to publish are doing it 18 times a day on Facebook.
So right? It's doing little things that take you slightly out of your comfort zone.
Exactly.
Yeah, so obviously fear is one thing, but another thing I'm interested in is practice and discipline, because being a master sword fighter and also a master writer, obviously practice and discipline are really important. So can you give us some tips about discipline and practice?
Okay, it's a skill like any other, and it can be trained like any other skill. If, for example, you were doing weightlifting, you would start with a light weight that you could actually lift, and you would do it until you started to get tired, and then you would rest. Yeah, and you'd recover and give yourself plenty of recovery time, and then you do it again, maybe with a slightly heavier weight. With discipline, it is exactly the same. You can't be completely disciplined all the time, right? And if you take on a gigantic project that takes ferocious discipline for hours at a stretch, it's impossible. So what you do is you start out with something really achievable. Maybe today, and maybe every day before breakfast, I'm going to sit down and write for 5 minutes. Okay, that's it. And that's achievable. And it requires some effort of will, but you can do it. And so then what you do is you go to the next level of maybe 10 minutes, and you try that, and maybe it's too much. So you bring it back down to 5 for a little bit, and then, or maybe you do it 5 minutes twice a day. But it's important that you're not all the time desperately working hard to do things that you find require discipline. Another way is if you recast the whole process. If you're only writing 5 or 10 minutes or an hour a day, you're probably not a professional writer. You probably have a job, and it takes discipline to get up and go to the job. Okay, so the reason that works, the reason you have the discipline for that, is because the consequences of failure are quite extreme, right? You lose your job, this is really bad, and there's all this social pressure to get it done. So if you make yourself accountable, you can use that same process. So, for example, Scrivener has this feature where you can tweet your word count, right? That might work for you or for somebody. Personally, I don't use that, but it's that sort of public accountability. If you say, I'm going to do this, and then people can track your progress, it's a very powerful motivator to get you to actually sit down and do it. But another preferable trick, I think, is you don't need discipline to write, because that's your relaxing time, right? This is your treat for yourself. You get to sit down and play with your novel for like 10 minutes every day before breakfast, or for half an hour when you get home from work, or whatever. Okay, so I do this with my own training. So if I feel like I'm like overloaded with work and I really need a break, I do some training. If I feel like, you know, I really need to get some work done, well, training makes me a better swordsman. It's therefore work. Right, I'm going to go training. So I just flip how I identify what I'm doing so that I'm more likely to go and do it. So I identify the things I want to be doing a lot, and I make whatever sort of adjustments in my head that I need to make to get it to actually happen.
I really like that, and I agree with you. I actually think it's one of the things that separates people who write a lot and people who struggle to write, because if it's not fun, like, why bother?
Well, yeah, why would you do it? Well,
like, just, you know, and I one of the things that I do now is I have a colouring book, because for me, to write, you need to bring out that playful side of you, and not think of it, as I must do that. It's like, yay, this is fun. And I imagine you like swinging a sword, like having a good, like, imagine you've got hard face on, but it's fun, right?
No. When I'm hitting with a sword, my face is totally relaxed. You don't hit people with your face.
No, I know, but as in, you know, are you like grinning away because you really enjoy it?
Well, if I'm really focused, I try and keep my face completely relaxed, because it's important to be relaxed.
Yeah, I must say, I'm not sitting there grinning away as I'm. Well, sometimes I laugh at myself writing.
but also, you know, you can write to avoid pain. Like one book I was writing, this is a translation of a medieval Italian manuscript. I'm not sure any of your readers would be the slightest bit interested in that particular book, but it was in my head and I couldn't get it out until I couldn't kind of settle with myself until I'd got it out. So I'd be like working on it for like 3 or 4 hours before lunch. And normally after lunch I stop, and I'm teaching in the evening so that I have the afternoons off, playing with the children or whatever. And my wife would be looking at me, I'll be eating lunch or whatever, and I'll finish my lunch. I'll be kind of staring off into space, like with these lines of Italian verse going in my head, and she'd look at me going, "Guy, go, off you go," because there's no point in talking to me because I'm not there. I'm in the book, and I can't stop until I've finished.
Yeah, and the reward is finishing the book. Sometimes it's really hard work, but you want to finish the book, and it's your masterwork of swordsmanship.
Or just finish the chapter. Yeah, like I'm in the middle of this chapter, and if I can just finish this chapter, then I can call it done. So yeah, writing to avoid pain is also a popular strategy.
Okay, so you also have in the book, you talk about this myth of talent, and you have kind of mentioned that things are a learned skill, but you know, what do you mean by that, the myth of talent, and how does that apply to swordsmanship and writing?
Okay. I think you should adopt only useful beliefs. Okay, and it's not useful to believe in inherent talent, because the thing is, if you want to do something, the first step shouldn't be to assess whether you're going to be world class at it in the first week, right? Because nobody is ever world class at anything in the first week. Okay, and while it's true that the early stages of learning any particular skill tend to be easier for some people than for others, and in any art, some aspects are easier than others for some people and different for others. The idea of inherent talent is just fundamentally flawed. I don't actually think it really exists in the way that people think it does. And it's not a useful belief to have anyway, even if it was true. Because fundamentally, the people who are good at things because they've worked at them, right? They may pretend that they haven't worked at them, and they may have all sorts of natural advantages or attributes that make it particularly easy for them to be particularly good at it. But, okay, here's a classic. Sword fighters need to be tall and strong, right? I'm not particularly tall. I'm stronger than I was, but I'm not particularly strong either. Rapier is like all about long thrusts and what have you. So you'd think my best ever rapier student would be 6'6" and long and skinny, right? No, my best ever rapier student is about 5'1", because she really, really worked. And she's rock solid, and she'll put a sword through your face faster than breathing, right? She's a terror, okay? So it's the idea of, when you write your first book, it's not going to be very good, but you don't have to publish it as it is. The first draft of my first book, I started writing it in about 1999, because one of my students said, Guy, you've got to write this stuff down. So I went, okay, fine, I'll try. And I sent it off to a publisher in 2002, and about 10 or 15% of that first draft made it into the final book that was published in 2004. Okay, they liked the idea, the execution sucked. Right, and that's me with a degree in English. I've been taught to write decent non-fiction, because when you write essays, you're taught to construct decent arguments and that sort of thing. Okay, so I learned to write it in the process of writing it, and my first book came out okay because it had editors. Really good editors who were really, really helpful and threw out all the rubbish and gently encouraged all the better stuff, right? My second book, maybe 90% of the first draft got into the final draft, and the whole process took 2 years instead of 4. So you learn it by doing it and by getting feedback on what you're doing. And this is true for absolutely any skill. So the idea that I can't write a book because I'm not a good writer is flawed. It's, I'm not a good writer, so I have to write a book, so I'll become a better writer, and then I'll be a better writer, and then I write another book and become an even better writer. And eventually, after maybe 20 books, maybe the first 19 of these books never get published, because maybe really you're starting from a really bad starting point. But it doesn't matter, as long as you have a system of actually doing it, and a system of getting feedback on what you're doing, and that is critical. The feedback is non-negotiable. If it's not there, the process fails. As long as that feedback process is there and you keep plugging away at it, you will naturally get good at it. The same way you will naturally get good at a computer game.
Or sword fighting.
Or sword fighting, yeah, exactly. Or sword fighting. And in sword fighting, the feedback tends to be pretty quick and immediate. You get plonked on the head. Yeah, not so much, but very careful.
Yeah,
but yes.
I imagine. Yeah. No, that's very cool. And I think, certainly, obviously many of my listeners are indie authors, so our feedback is going to be editors and also then, readers and reviews. So,
readers and reviews, absolutely.
And fast feedback is a much better way to learn. Like, I just don't understand people who spend 4 years of an MFA writing one book over and over and over again, and not just, it's crazy. So I totally agree with you on all of that. So I also wanted to ask you about what writers get wrong with sword fights in books, because I've had somebody on talking about what people get wrong with guns. So it will be, because there's a lot of people who are writing, swords and fantasy books with swords. Sure. It's so popular now. Yep. I haven't done any sword fighting in my thrillers, but maybe I will. So
if you do, please let me.
I will be sending it to you.
I'll be happy to give you the feedback.
I would love that. I'm going to have to write a sword scene now specifically to send to you. But tell us, what are the main things that authors get wrong with fight scenes?
Okay, perhaps the most obvious one is they make swords do things that swords can't do. So, for example, there's a certain kind of idea of how armored combat works, where you're all in armor and somebody swings a sword at your head and it cuts through your helmet and you die. Okay, helmets are expensive, and people pay the money for them because they work. Now, sure, it is possible to get through a helmet with something that is a sword or a sword-like object, but generally speaking, armor works. So there's the big obvious one, and you see it on the screen as much as you see it in books. Also, swords are not heavy. So the biggest sword I have is up to about my nose. It has a crossguard about this wide. And for those of you not looking at the video, I'm holding my hands about shoulder width apart. The thing is gigantic, right? It weighs 3 kilos, and I can swing it around with one hand.
Wow. Just show us the sword that's next to you as well.
Oh, right. Well, this is just a long sword. And if I put it on the ground, it comes up to about my sternum, which you can't see on the video. And it is, it's a beast.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah. And this delightful, lovely thing, as you can see, I'm manipulating it with my fingers because it weighs about 1.3 kilos.
Goodness.
Right? Yeah.
How much does that cost?
It really depends. My cheapest sword was somewhere around £250. And I won't tell you how much the most expensive one cost because my wife might listen to this.
No, fair enough. I mean, that was a beautiful object for people who can't see it.
Yeah,
but
that one was about €400, £350.
But what you just showed me there, I didn't know. I thought swords were heavy. So
Right.
What are the other things people get wrong?
Okay. To my mind, the thing that most bugs me about most historical combat that's put into books is that it's boring, right? Because the thing is, you read a book for the characters and the plot, okay? And the action is there because it's exciting, but also because the reason it's exciting is because your character who you care about is in danger, right? That's why it works. And so when a fight goes on for ages and ages and ages and ages and ages, and nobody seems to be in any real danger, and you kind of, oh, for God's sake, just stab him already, get on with it. And so I guess the biggest thing is getting swept away in the action and forgetting character and plot. That's the key thing. It's what bugs me the most.
Yeah, which is actually the same with any kind of fight scene. And
Absolutely.
I imagine, I mean, the MMA guy was like, all these trading blows that you see, it just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, most people, if they're not trained for it, you give them one solid punch in the head, they will probably go down.
Yeah, and with the sword, you wouldn't stand much chance, like you said. I mean,
it's a labor-saving device.
Yeah. Which I think is hilarious. So I've got to ask you, Game of Thrones, which I love. I mean, I'm a super fan of Game of Thrones.
All right.
Are they? Oh dear, he's holding his head in his hands now.
We can go there. Okay.
We can go there. No, I just want to know, like, how realistic is like the sword fighting in Game of Thrones?
Okay. I like Game of Thrones, the TV show. I didn't much care for the books. I read the first one. Everybody I liked died at the end. Thought I can't bother with the second one because the characters I was following were no longer there.
Yeah.
Okay. My wife and I both enjoy the Game of Thrones thing, and particularly the dragons and all that kind of stuff. All the really kind of fancy Gumby elements. The sword fight I remember best was when Ned Stark was captured.
Oh yeah. They were in a ring and the men were surrounding them.
Yeah, and it was just so bad. It was just, okay, this man has clearly, I mean, this is Sean Bean, right? He was on Lord of the Rings.
He's got superpowers.
He carried a sword for like 4 years. He was sharp. He carried a sword for like the 10 years that TV series ran. I mean, the man has probably spent as much time with the sword as I have, right? And they made him do things, and maybe he's never trained with it, but he's carried one for an awful long time. And the stuff, it was just, yeah. So now what happens when there's a sword fight in Game of Thrones or any other thing, I tend to shut my eyes and wait till it's over, just because so it doesn't ruin things.
So because it's too theatrical, as you say, it's a performance. It's not real fighting.
Yeah, and it's not even really good performance because this person is supposed to be an expert fighter, and he's fighting like a child. And it's just not how an expert fighter would ever behave. But the same is true of absolutely any specialist discipline. So, if I'm watching a film about hackers and the person I'm watching it with happens to be a computer expert, they go, "Oh God, no!" It's not.
No, yeah, I know.
I mean, it's true for every single
Yeah.
every single specialist discipline. So it's not like Game of Thrones are particularly bad in this respect. And there are some good sword fights out there.
Like what? Give us an example of a good sword fight in a film or TV.
Okay, The Duelists.
Is that a film?
Yeah, directed by, I think it was Ridley Scott a long, long time ago. It's got Harvey Keitel in it. And the first fight is between a cavalry officer and a civilian. The cavalry officer is a trained killer who's never used a small sword before, which is kind of the courtly, straight, light thing they used in the 17th and 18th centuries. And his opponent is an untrained person who is terrified. And the fight goes exactly the way that would happen.
So it's quite quick.
It is relatively quick, not completely quick because the guy's using an unfamiliar weapon. Also, they do this fantastic saber duel, two cavalry officers having a saber duel, and they're both, by the end of it, completely exhausted and streaming blood and whatever. It is brilliant.
So
I love the film. I didn't like the film very much, but the fight at the end of Rob Roy, Liam Neeson's Rob Roy, really good.
Okay.
You have a fop with a rapier, and a thug with a broadsword, and it was just, yeah, it was great because the characters were there. The way they fought really represented their characters.
Are there anything you can think of with women?
Oh, that's a hard question. Like, a third of my students are women, and I'm doing whatever I can to persuade people that actually, you know, women are just as good at sword fighting as men, because it's not about being bigger or stronger or any of that sort of stuff. The problem is, though, in any fight, size and strength do actually matter.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, so if you have two people of equal training, the bigger, stronger person will usually beat the smaller, weaker one. But if you have somebody with not very much training and someone with lots of training, then the person with the training advantage can be smaller and weaker and still defeat the other.
I want to go and do a sword fighting lesson now. I'm going to put it on my list. Yeah.
Dude, yeah, come to Helsinki. I'll stick a sword.
I've shot guns. You know, I should try a sword.
Yeah, why not? Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I know there'll be some people listening who are like, they're talking about things that actually kill people, and it's the same with guns. But you know, we're writing this stuff, and I think, you know, we're humans. People have killed us. We've killed each other for, you know, since we came out the woods, whatever. So it seems to me that we have to tackle these types of things. But how do you tackle that kind of, this is my amazing sword. It's a thing of beauty. This is my hobby, and you know, potentially it's a killing device. That's why it was invented, was to kill people. So how do you reconcile this kind of art, beauty, death thing?
Okay. If we didn't have death, we wouldn't have a word for life.
Oh.
If you think about it, it's if you confront your own mortality in whatever way you do that, there is an opportunity for spiritual growth that you cannot get any other way. And the sword is fundamentally a transitional object. It transforms you from one thing into another. From a sort of metaphysical perspective, you can think of the sword as something which separates truth from falsehood, or pierces the veil of illusion.
Ooh, very nice.
You can go in all sorts of sort of mystical directions with it, but fundamentally, you have to come to terms with your own mortality at some point in your life, and it's better to do it earlier than later. And you know, everything that is beautiful has an element of destruction in it. I mean, a beautiful table has a dead tree in it, right? A beautiful painting has things which have been transformed from their original state and made into something else, and the person in it may well have been dead for 300 years, right? And art is a way of fighting against death, right? If you write a book, it lives on after you. If you paint a picture, it can live on after you. It's a representation of yourself into the future, and a martial art is no different. It's all art. And as Neil Gaiman said, make good art. This just happens to be mine.
Well, it's not only, I mean, you have the swords, but you have the writing and the teaching, and there's a joy in kind of passing that on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I guess
teaching is an art, writing is an art. And the thing is, you know, the reason that we have these martial arts to study is because people wrote books in the 17th century, in the 15th century, whenever. And those books have survived when the people did not, and when the arts that the books represent did not. So we can recreate them from the books, not perfectly, but we can recreate them. So the art is being revived now, literally brought back to life when once it was dead. And that's because of the books. So I'm actually coming to the point where I think the most important thing I do for the survival of the art that I practice is writing the books. It's actually more important than teaching students or my own personal training.
That's brilliant. And then I presume you're having like illustrations in the books too, of pictures of swords, demonstrations of technique.
My latest book has like 6 photographs in it, so it's not really a technical book at all. But most of my other books are technical manuals, how to do it, and so they are extensively illustrated. I also have a lot of videos online as well. Yeah. So if you want to see how the sword should be used.
Yeah, which is fine. So and we'll give your website out in a minute, because they're really good to go and have a look at that. So with this kind of, I'm interested in the revival, because I really think we're living in this maker movement time where, you know, it used to be that you just kind of watch TV, and now you can make TV with YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be you listen to radio, now we're making radio.
Yeah.
You used to you have a publisher, and now, you know, just read, now you're writing books. And, you know, I think we're in this kind of maker renaissance. And this is happening in craft too, right? I mean, people are making their own swords now, aren't they? You know, actually getting, and the craft of, my husband likes Japanese stuff, and, you know, this kind of, isn't it like a 15-year apprenticeship or something, just folding the steel or something?
Oh yeah, it's ridiculously long. I mean, there was a woodworker, sorry, not a woodworker, a chap who made woodworking planes called Sadahide, and he was retiring at the end of a long and illustrious career. But all is not lost, because his son, Sadahide Jr., was going to take over the business. Okay. And Sadahide Jr. was considered one of Japan's up-and-coming young blade makers.
Yeah.
Okay. Sadahide Jr. was 65.
Yeah, I was going to say.
He'd been making plain blades for 50 years.
Yeah.
He's an up-and-coming young blade maker. I mean, it's just a different perspective. And it's one thing I like about martial arts, as opposed to combat sports. Like, for example, mixed martial arts, where you get in the ring and you get the shit kicked out of you. Mm. In classical martial arts, traditional martial arts, and the sort of stuff I do, we have people who are training into their 60s and 70s. Mm. I intend to be training into my 90s and 100s. So we have a whole lot of stuff we have to do to kind of stay healthy, and we mustn't push it, must avoid injury, all that sort of thing. But it's this long-term view. But to get back to your point about it's the age of the creator, I absolutely agree. Absolutely anybody can now make stuff and get it out there because we have the internet, which makes it all easy.
Fantastic. And yes, so talking of the internet, where can people go to find you and your books and all your stuff online? Okay.
I set up a page on my blog for your readers, Janice, because most of the stuff on my blog is going to be very technical, like an in-depth academic discussion of exactly how long a rapier should be. I mean, stuff like that, which perhaps
most people aren't interested.
Readers aren't terribly interested, but for my readers, that's like crack cocaine to them. Like, they're super pleased with that sort of thing. So I set up a page which is at guywindsor.net/blog/Joanna, which is a nice little landing page for writers, and there's a links to articles I've written which are appropriate to writers. So, for example, about my writing setup, standing desks and that kind of thing, about crowdfunding, because 2 of my books have been funded through crowdfunding, which is one way of getting a publisher's advance without a publisher. And you can also see my sword fighting book there as well,
which is fantastic. And I really enjoyed that, even though, this is a kind of peripheral to what I do, but I really enjoyed the book. It was, and it's got stuff about writing in as well. So that was fantastic, Guy. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.